call that a Disney podcast? This is a Disney podcast. G'day and welcome to Magic by Design. I'm doing a bit.
Our Australian listeners are so offended.
If you're listening for the first time, thanks so much for taking the time to press play or download.
You didn't even do, by the way, the good day right. In order to do an Australian accent, and I've been taught this by an Australian, so it's perfectly legitimate. You say good eye, mate. You say good eye, not good day.
Good eye?
Good eye, mate.
It works.
Yeah, so there you go. You automatically slip into the Australian accent if you do that. But yes, continue with your introduction.
If you're listening for the first time, thanks so much for taking the time to press play or download on the podcast. We are delighted to have you with us. Magic by Design is a podcast in which we are aiming to watch and review every Disney animated feature film. Each and every week we break down a movie from the Disney canon in an attempt to discover the secrets behind the magic. We took a trip to a land down under where women glow and men plunder this week when we watched Disney's 29th animated feature film, The Rescuers Down Under, a sequel to 1977's The Rescuers. But before we proceed to butcher the Australian accent for the bones of an hour, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Ken and I am joined as always by my co-host / brother, Garrett. Gar, how are you? I was going to put in an Australian word for brother, but I think it's the same.
Pal. I'm trying to think of what does Liam say, because I host the podcast with an Australian, Ken, Wednesday War Games, with my good close personal friend Liam Jones. So I listen to his Australian voice a lot. But anyway, this podcast, of course, Ken, is not the first sequel in the history of Magic by Design.
It's not?
No, it's the 28th. What are we on? Again, I wasn't listening. 29th. I'm always one behind. I'm clearly one behind. This is this is the 28th sequel. I was technically right. The first one's not a sequel.
The first one is the first one.
Yes, so this is the 28th sequel in the history of Magic by Design, but the first sequel in the history of Disney animated features. How exciting.
Not only that, Gar, but we are now halfway through our Disney journey of reviewing the current films.
Again, it really doesn't feel like we've been doing this for 29 weeks. Sorry, math.
Yeah, I was literally, as we were coming into a record, I was like, have we done 28 of these? I guess we have.
Which is 7 months worth of podcasts.
Started when the lockdown came, and here we are.
Doesn't feel like 7 months of podcasts. What has happened to these 7 months? We're halfway there. We're living on a prayer.
Raya and the Last Dragon is coming out in the new year, so we had to review that at some stage.
Is it though?
Well, it's still scheduled for theatres, but we'll have to see.
It's probably going to get delayed. Everything will get delayed. And they'll never release another. Though actually, vaccine might happen, so maybe it won't be. But you'll never know.
They may put it on Disney Plus yet.
They did that with Mulan. I wonder how much money that made, though.
Yes, and the next Pixar film, Soul, is also going on Disney Plus on Christmas Day.
On the demand thing as well?
No, I think it's free.
Really? Well...
Christmas present.
With your subscription. It's not free.
Free in the sense that you don't have to pay an extra $30.
Yes. No additional purchase necessary. But I would have seen Mulan in the cinema, but I not a hope in hell I'm paying for it on Disney Plus.
It was supposed to be out in March, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it's like, then in fairness, cinema, if we're going whole hog, and I will because I love popcorn and I'm fat, probably $15. That's double.
Well, in theory, it's because, $15 is for you. And if you and I were going to go to the cinema, it would cost approximately $30, which is the cost of the thing on Disney Plus.
Yeah, that's fair. And if a family is watching, it's good bang for the buck.
So they know. Well, I still think it isn't.
You don't think about it the same way, do you?
No, you really don't. I don't value watching things at home the same way. I think I value it watching in the theater because you are paying more for the theater experience that you don't have at home. You're paying for the big screen. You're paying for you're paying on top of it for the popcorn. But the
comfy seats,
the surround sound speakers, and the big theater environment, which is a thing I very much enjoy. I'm not. People are like it's going to die, and I don't think it ever will die. Because I don't think I'm alone in saying I very much enjoy the cinema experience.
Yeah, a lot of people say, why don't you just download things? And I'm like, no, I really like going to the cinema. I don't drink, I don't take drugs, I don't smoke. It's my only vice. It's the only thing I really love. I will pay over the odds to get that big box of popcorn.
And watch bad films.
Yes.
Invariably.
Sometimes the soda drinks are mediocre because...
Soda drinks?
Yeah.
What kind of words are they?
I'm trying to...
No, don't you adopt to our American oppressors.
I'm trying to appeal to an international audience.
Trying to use their crappy words. Soda. What kind of Irishman do you think you are using the word soda?
Sorry. Anyway, the whole point is sometimes they're at the end of the barrel of the flavour and it tastes terrible.
Yeah, and the ones in, because, different cinemas, and the one of the cinemas near us, very bad drinks, super watered down, not very nice at all. So you have to go a little further into town. Actually, it's about the same distance into town, really, if you walk it.
Yeah, about an hour each way.
They're both about an hour away.
But we can't do that anymore, Gar.
No, we can't. Well, not for another 3 weeks in theory. Then we'll go back to
fingers crossed.
Yeah, then we'll go back to level 3 in theory. And level 3
cinemas are open.
Cinemas?
Yeah.
So go and watch old movies again, which I actually quite enjoyed, even though I only saw Lord of the Rings.
And then there's these movies that came out because they were never getting a release, but they're like, this is here on the shelf. It was never going to make money. Let's throw it out there because it's a captive audience.
Yeah, but here we are talking about The Rescuers Down Under, the least Australian film known to man.
It's absolutely insane.
Didn't you say they visited Australia for this?
They did.
Did they not see anything?
They got Ayers Rock in there, sorry, Uluru, to give it its proper term.
Yeah, they were like, there was a kangaroo playing a didgeridoo in the opening sequence, and then there's like, there we go, that's our Australian quota. And they have one actual Australian actor in the entire film.
Yes, the rest are varying levels of BBC English and American. Like Cody the Kid does an accent for like this first 30 seconds maybe, and then he's just American.
He's just American the whole time. He doesn't even do an accent. The koala tries. Koala tries to do an accent, but even then, it's not. Because like when I heard the koala, it's like, that's not an Australian. I was like, look it up. Nope, not an Australian at all.
And there's plenty of Australians in Hollywood, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would imagine you wouldn't have had to look very far to find an Australian accent.
Crocodile Dundee was floating around at the time, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
He could have done a voice.
Sure.
Of a crocodile. Synergy.
There you go. Yeah, it's very strange that they made this film. Like, they decided to make a film about the rescuers going to Australia, and they didn't make it Australian really in any way whatsoever. It's very strange.
They have the animals, and some of this... It didn't even look very much like the outback.
It's just desert. Could have been in Nevada.
Could have been anywhere. Like, the fact that it had the rock kind of had some sense of place, but it did. You're right in that sense. It didn't have the sense of being in the big expanse of Australia.
Yeah, they put Down Under right there in the title, Ken. I want the rescuers to go to Australia, experience Australian culture, but no, there's just some koalas there.
And some dodgy accents.
Yeah, some very, very dodgy accents. This podcast has had less dodgy accents.
I could have done a better job now that I know how to do it properly. G'day.
G'day, mate.
G'day, mate.
G'day, mate.
This is another first-time watch for me, Gar. I'm going to brush past that. That was horrific.
Oh, the poor Australians and what we do to them. Feel free to mock our... I have a very neutral accent, though, so I'm not like, oh, Faith and Bigara. Diddly I.
A lot of people say to me I have quite an Americanized accent. I don't have a typical Irish or Cork accent. That's where we're from.
Which is interesting, because our parents... I wouldn't say they have extreme Cork accents, but they do have Cork accents.
That's what you get when you're raised by television, Gar.
Our brother... has
he puts it on a bit,
Cork
though.
accent. It's funny, Ed, when he gets mad. I don't know if he's even listened to this show, but it's funny that we're going to talk about him. It's funny when he gets mad, his Cork accent comes out more. He's like,
it does.
No. He goes full Cork when he gets mad. It's quite funny.
It's very lyrical.
Yeah.
As I was saying, Gert, this is a first time watch for me again. I've seen clips here and there, but other than that, I didn't really know a lot about this film, other than it was Down Under, theoretically, in fact.
It's in the name, it's right there.
The Rescuers Down Under is the first film sequel released theatrically by Disney. This has been on my mind all week, Gar. Why The Rescuers for the first sequel? I tried to get to the bottom of this in my research for the episode this week, and I didn't find much. Why do you think this property was the chosen one, Gar?
I think there's a very simple reason. That, like, aside from the Great Mouse Detective, which is more recent, this is probably the easiest thing they've made so far to just say, we're going to just pluck these characters, put them in a different place and do the same thing again. You know, you can't do, Bambi 2 that way. You can't do Lady and the Tramp 2 that way. You can't do any of these other films that same kind of like, all right, we just want to do an adventure film. We just want to change the setting and that's about it. You know, so if you're thinking about the Disney films that have come before this, what can they do with it? The only other one, as I said, is probably Great Mouse Detective, where you can just go, they have another case. But that film is relatively more recent, so it's...
But if you look at the Jungle Book as well, they could have done another story from the Jungle Book, or a series of stories.
But it's not as easy as just going, well, we're going to put them in Australia, you know? Because that's all this film is. That's the problem with this film. This film is like every animated sequel ever, where it's like, it doesn't really need to exist. It doesn't really contribute anything that the first film didn't have. It doesn't bring anything new. It doesn't look at these characters in a new way. It doesn't like contribute anything to the broader Rescuers lore as if that's a thing. It's just one of those films that has been made and it's perfectly fine, but it's entirely forgettable. It's in the Monsters University tier of these kind of movies. You know, we can't all get Toy Story 2, which are in some ways emotionally deeper masterpieces building off the original. This is very much like Monsters University, very much Cars 2, very much all the straight to the like DVD movies that they made. It's all those like pretty unimaginative, churned out by like, all right, we're taking them to Australia and here's the crime, here's the villain. It's not even particularly Australian. In, out, done. 75 minutes. It all moves by relatively quickly. Nobody could possibly be annoyed at this film because it's really like there's nothing there to be annoyed at, and that's maybe a problem in its own right. Because if it was trying for something and missed, and you could get mad about it, at least it would be trying for something. But it's not trying for anything. It's just like, we'll just do The Rescuers again, but in Australia. But is it really Australia?
Yeah, it felt to me like The Rescuers, except slightly worse with a different coat of paint.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about this in a minute. The production was very much a by numbers type of thing. It was reaching for something different, but it also, again...
What do you think it was reaching for?
It was reaching for the action-adventure genre, which was
but that's what the first one was reaching for too. Like, I feel like these films are meant to be like kids' versions of Indiana Jones isn't probably the right thing, but that's the only thing that comes to mind right now. They're meant to be like Indiana Jones, but for kids.
Yeah.
They're on an adventure, solving a mystery, helping the kid. That's what the first one was, and that's what this one is too.
That's the thing, I wanted to like this, and I do remember I wasn't blown away by The Rescuers, but I at least enjoyed it.
I thought, what did we settle on? Jolly Good Time? Wasn't that The Rescuers?
Yeah.
Which, or was that Great Mouse Detective, which I formerly used Jolly Good Time for? I don't even remember.
I think it was the Rescuers. But the thing is as well, like, it just made no sense. Why do they need to go... It's a very flimsy plot in the story.
Yeah, it's like this kid is kidnapped in the Australian outback and they send a message literally across the world, because it's a sequence that they show the message bouncing between all these countries to get to the freaking rat people who are sitting there in their rat UN being like, send the Hungarian and US representatives to save this Australian child in the... Is there not like Australian representatives they could have sent? I suppose they're like, let's send our best detectives, but I don't know.
But what if, like, it takes a couple of days to get to Australia. What if in that time McLeach just killed him?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. That kid could have died. And they were flying there by bird. I suppose they flew via plane via bird. So maybe it was a little, or via bird via plane, whichever comes first. So whichever, it probably was only like a day or two, but still. That's a very long time. That kid could be dead.
Yeah, especially in the outback.
That giant, like, stupidly large eagle could also be dead. Its eggs have been stolen and eaten by the thing.
Yeah, I mean, like, everything else was presented as realistic, or at least to scale, but, like, they just decided to have that eagle be giant so that it's big enough for a kid to ride on its back, and it made no sense, but they never referenced why.
Also, I want to explain the deeper lore of the Rescuers world. So we know that the rats can talk, right? We know the albatross can talk.
They're mice, Gar.
Same thing. Again, we're going back to my Great Mouse Detective throwing mice and rats in the same category. But we know the albatross can talk. But, like, then we can see that the eagle can't talk, and, like, the salamander can't talk, but the kangaroos and the koalas can talk. So, like, what world is this? Why can't these characters talk? Why can some of the animals talk, but some of the other animals can't talk? What's the difference?
I don't know, maybe some of them are magic?
Sure. Australian creatures are all magic.
Or maybe some of them are educated and others aren't. So the ones that can talk and have clothes are privileged. Because there's some nude mice in this one, Gar. Some of the mice are just completely starkers, where most of the rest of them wear clothes.
Well, it was only the one that was kidnapped, or well, not kidnapped, he got caught in a trap. So maybe, like, he was stripped of his clothing when he got caught in the trap.
Yeah, he had a very fine, what's a native dress in Australia?
I don't know.
A vest. Yes.
Sure.
And no bottoms.
They only have vests in Australia, nothing else.
That's what I picture when I picture an Australian.
Just them wearing vests and entirely nude otherwise?
Yes.
Sure.
During its opening weekend, The Rescuers Down Under grossed 3.5 million, that's 7 million in 2020, ranking 4th in its opening few days after Home Alone, Rocky 5 and Child's Play 2. Some stiff competition there.
Oh, Home Alone's a great film though. Oh, they released the same day as Home Alone. That's a much better film.
Yeah, and that's going to very much take all that audience.
Like, if you're looking at the kiddie audience and you're like, Rescuers Down Under or Home Alone, I'm taking my kids to Home Alone every time.
That film I kind of watched when I was a kid, or this new one from people that I know. Chris Columbus.
Yeah, Chris Columbus
John
is great.
Hughes.
John Williams music.
What more could you want?
Yeah.
As a result, then studio chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg decided to pull all of the Rescuers advertising on television. That's
really?
Salty, because it didn't do so well in its opening weekend.
Just Jeffrey Katzenberg. How has he been so successful?
I don't know. In fairness, we'll get to Beauty and the Beast, and he did make a crucial decision in that. We'll talk about that next week. That was favourable, but so far he's been the villain of the last few films.
Yeah, trying to throw a part of your world, freaking sabotage. This is a Black Cauldron situation all over again, Ken. I'm once again going to stand up for the mediocrity of the Rescuers Down
We don't
Under.
have time for you to carry out all these gripes every week, Ken.
Yeah, there's me against the Aristocats and me against Jeffrey Katzenberg and my super defense of the Black Cauldron, which now will also include the Rescuers Down Under, because Jeffrey Katzenberg wanted to kill it. He wanted to sabotage it. Also, if the film isn't doing well, why is your reaction to promote it less? I guess they're like, cut the losses, no sunk costs. But what if you're like, we can rescue it? Rescue the Rescuers Down Under. That's the third film. Rescuing the Rescuers Down Under. Because they didn't show anything in the epilogue, Ken. Maybe they're just stuck there forever. They can't get home from Australia.
The film did go on to make 94 million in 2020 money. That's 50 million at the time. And I couldn't find any information on the budget. So, as you said, a lot of the money goes on the advertising. So maybe they just decided to cut their losses so that they could make some more money, or at least
boost the margins, if you will.
Yeah. Critics were mixed on the film. They were a bit cold to the second-rate story, but praised the production values.
3D!
We shouted that several times during this film.
Oh, there's so much of it. It's actually very funny. As we said, but there was The Great Mouse Detective and what's the one that came before
Oliver
that?
and Company.
Oliver and Company, both of which had good, a decent amount of 3D involved. Then we went to The Little Mermaid, which actually had remarkably little, and they've swung right back around. There's a ton of it in this film.
Some of it is really successful, like the opening and obviously the scenes with the birds flying. Mm-hmm. But then others are like really jarring in that it doesn't blend with the rest of the film at all.
Yeah, there's the scene where Albatross is taken off. What's the Albatross's name?
Wilbur.
Wilbur, there we go. Named after the Animal Crossing character, of course. Wilbur is taking off, and like they when he's diving through the buildings, they go full 3D, but the buildings just look like those horrible, jagged, early, lack of detailed 3D buildings. And he's zooming between cars that are just like 3D outlines of cars with like headlamps, and it's not very particularly nice looking at all. But I do find it really interesting how like Little Mermaid, little bits of 3D, like very, very little. There's like a boat turning sequence where it's like a few frames of animation they did in 3D, and the rest is more or less 2D animation, even if it's done digitally. But here it's just like, we're going all in. We're going to do all the 3D.
Yeah, 3D to the max. Curiously, though, they didn't use that in the promotion of the film.
Why not?
Don't know.
Why aren't they like the most 3D film we ever 3D'd? Because that is a factual statement.
Okay, one more thing before we move on to the actual animation, because we touched on it there. They praised the technical achievement of the film, of course. So we can all agree that it's a spectacular looking movie in some parts, especially the flight scenes. But despite the disappointing performance of the film, a third entry was planned for later in the 90s, but was permanently shelved after the deaths of Ava Gabor and John Candy, who played Wilbur.
Really took out
most of the cast. So,
and like John Candy is already replacing somebody who died in the original Rescuers, isn't he?
Yeah, so Orville was the original albatross in the first film that flew them to the bayou where they rescued Penny, was it?
Yeah.
And he died the year they were producing the film, I'm pretty sure. So they replaced him with Wilbur, who is supposed to be his brother, I think. Mm-hmm. But then John Candy died in 94 as well, so.
Both those characters named after the Animal Crossing birds, of course.
Well, it's the Wright brothers.
Animal Crossing birds.
Okay, sorry.
So yeah, and then, as you said, Ava Gabor died, so at that stage you're like, the entire cast is dead. What's even the point?
But like, it just baffles me why they chose this as like the first franchise.
I explained it to you.
Okay, Gar, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's
very good explanation.
It's the easiest to do. It's the path of least resistance. The Rescuers.
What do you think the third one would have been?
Rescuers in South America, and then Jose Carioca would have shown up, and it's a crossover with Saludos Amigos.
No, that name is banned.
Ken got very upset because he was watching season 2 of DuckTales this week, and Jose Carioca popped up, and he like had war flashbacks.
But also Panchito Pistoles.
Oh, both
who's now
of
just
them.
Panchito because they took away his guns.
Oh, censor Disney Plus censoring these characters.
They also took away Jose Carioca's cigar.
Yeah. So
figures. But those names are banned from this podcast, Gar. So please don't ever use them again.
Yeah, because me and Ken were watching some Kitchen Nightmares, and then I went to bed, and I just heard Ken screaming at the top of his lungs at the other end of the house while watching DuckTales, and he was like, "No, not again!" screaming, and his dog Connie was just looking at him, being like, "What's wrong with you?" And then I walked down the hall, and it's like I just saw Ken huddling in the corner behind the chair,
bleeding from my eyes,
muttering, Jose Carioca to himself, while the DuckTales theme played in the background.
As we noted in previous weeks, this is the first Disney animated feature film to be produced completely on a computer using digital software. As a result, it's also the first ever feature film to be produced without the use of a traditional film camera.
There you go. I imagine that would become the norm a lot afterward, because like Toy Story was released, 92?
Well, it was released in 94, so it would have been in production.
Was that 94?
Yeah.
Really?
Same year as The Lion King. 94, 95?
Yeah. So all those films, these animated films increasingly have no camera involved. It's all digital. And this film does look very nice.
Yeah. it's a digital camera, and I have done some work with digital cameras myself in animation modules in college, and it's not easy to get your head around. Just the way it's in 3D space, so it's kind of abstract, so it's something you really have to be skilled to do.
And it's funny to see people like working that out, and like the same thing happened in video games in the 90s, or they're like, we used to operate entirely in 3D, where we had this one perspective, which is looking at the screen as it moves from left to right, straight on, and then they're like, now everything is in 3D. Now everything is in this 3D space, and you need a camera to see around the 3D space. And I always find it fascinating, if you go back to Mario 64, Ken, which was the first 3D Mario game, they actually put Lakitu as a character to represent the 3D camera, because they knew like the idea of a 3D camera that a player can control there's such a revolutionary, difficult to comprehend idea at that stage of video game history, that they had to like contextualize it within the game so that people understood it better. And I find that very, like, we take that stuff for granted. If you ever play any video games, like, right stick moves the camera. That's the most basic computer game thing you'll ever see in your life. But back then, it's like, how will people understand this?
Without their tiny brains melting.
Yeah, so it's probably quite similar here, where it's like, we can use this 3D camera in really interesting and weird ways, like where they do like sweeping shots through the outback, which they just couldn't do in 2D animation. Or if they could, it would take them a very, 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 very long time.
And it wouldn't be as smooth or anything like that.
Yeah, so they're like, how do we introduce it? Will people get motion sick? Do you think that was a consideration here?
Yeah, because like the 3D opening is very cinematic, different camera techniques, as we said, blur, like the pan, and that's quite a long pan across that field. And even when I was looking at it, I felt a little bit kind of
gawky.
A little bit, not gawky, but like, disoriented because it was so fast. So I imagine people in the cinema going, whoa!
Because like we always laugh at the famous scene of the train running toward the screen when people are sitting in the cinema and they flee in terror thinking the train is going to actually come into them. But like, that's because they never saw it before. So when you think about like 3D cameras in animation, that's a thing people never saw before. So like, legitimately, I would have thought like, motion sickness is probably a thing they thought about. It's like, we can't use this too much because people aren't used to it and they will throw up. It's the same thing like if you move into like 2020 worlds, VR. It's the same thing. We're not used to VR spaces. So like VR games that move too fast or that like mess with our brain or don't run at the right frame rate make us feel nauseous. And that's a thing that will probably slowly go away as VR becomes more pervasive, if VR becomes more pervasive, I guess. But at the moment, it's a thing that every VR developer has to deal with. And it's funny to think about it back in the 90s. Just using a 3D camera in animation.
And if you remember, Gar, back in the 30s, they had the same concern about Snow White being in colour. So these things come with each innovation. But to your point on VR, I think it needs to become less expensive and more players in the market. Otherwise, I think it will peter out.
Yeah, you see, there's the like Ready Player One vision of VR, where like VR becomes the world and we all operate in these digital spaces. And like every morning when we go to work, we get into our VR machine and work in our virtual office with our haptic feedback, that you feel the touch of things, and when you shake hands in the virtual space, your little VR gloves tingle to make your hands feel like they're actually shaking hands and all that stuff. That's like the extreme vision of VR, which could happen. Maybe it will happen. Maybe we will all become weird computer beings like the fat people from WALL-E, except hooked up to computers all the time. Or it'll just go away. Which will be more interesting if it happens, if it just doesn't catch on, and it hasn't caught on. And like, a lot of people are trying. You have Oculus, you have Valve, you have Microsoft, and you have Sony all trying their own VR devices. And of course, Nintendo's, where you put it into a piece of cardboard and stick it on your face. Go Nintendo!
Yeah, there was that 3D fad a few years ago, which didn't catch on. So.
Yeah, 3D died, which is very interesting to see. Just like everyone was like, get a 3D TV. Every film is in 3D, and 3D died. Even the 3DS is gone. Nintendo were just like,
that did make me cocky.
Yeah, and like the 3DS is, I think, the only thing that actually solved for the big problem people have with 3D, which is I don't think people really want to put big dumb glasses on their face. But even then, nobody used the 3D in 3DS by like the second year of using it. Yeah. So 3D died. Will VR die? We'll see.
That's another good point. There's the self-consciousness of wearing that device on your face.
Yeah, it's just it's a huge barrier to entry for people, and it's I think the biggest thing, and it'll probably be a thing that is solved if our culture increasingly pushes us into like communicating and engaging with other in digital spaces. But the biggest thing is that it is not like shareable. You know, you and I, in order to play a VR game, would both have to find a room for like movement around our house, put on the headsets together, and play together. It's a solo activity, unless, as I said, we move into a space where we're all operating in that digital realm, where it will become a collective activity. And I don't think there's literally anything that's a strictly solo activity that catches on like that.
But if we look at COVID, that kind of thing might push us in that direction.
Oh, yeah. And like the technology is nowhere near there yet, but like us going to the cinema might actually be like a virtual theatre. As I said, we'll put the VR headset on, we'll find our seat in the virtual theatre and we'll watch it, the big movie on the big screen, and they'll have, as I said, all the haptic feedback stuff that'll make it feel like it's a real cinema. Like that could be the future. It could be.
Here's what's going to blow your mind, Carl. They already have that.
Oh, I know, but like no one uses it. That's the thing.
It's too expensive. So,
and like as I said, the haptic feedback stuff is the stuff that will like make or break it. That makes it feel real. Which technology will get there eventually, like 100%.
It's going to be expensive though, and like you'll have like, oh, you had to get the gloves for this experience, and the kit will just keep growing, and it'll get more and more expensive. But yeah, VR.
All of that has nothing to do with the Rescuers Down Under.
Getting back on track here,
you can always tell like how little we have to say about certain films by how many tangents we go on. It's like, how can we fill the 45 minutes or so of our podcast this week when The Rescuers Down Under is a pretty shallow experience?
This is the first film to use Pixar's CAPS process.
Mm-hmm.
So it's...
You told us what that stood for last week, but I don't remember.
Yes,
Computer Animated Production System, was that it?
Nailed it, Gar.
Go me.
Well done, you did half listen to me.
I retained information from last week.
One thing that people think, and it's a bit of a misconception, is that because it's a computer, it means that everything is produced in computers, which is actually the case today. Mm-hmm. Like the drawings are made in computers, they're rendered, all this. But like the drawings were still done by hand, except that they were scanned into a computer, the drawings and the backgrounds, and then they were digitized and then touched up and shaded. And you really do notice that in this film as well, though. The color palette is very nice,
and it's consistent. Like it just doesn't have that like the painterly effects that I did really like in those, especially in like the Sleeping Beauties and the Bambis of like the particularly pretty Disney animated films. They're gone. That era's over.
It's not. They're still there to an extent, but it's not the same.
Yeah, and they're increasingly going away. And like if you look at because when we finished watching The Rescuers, the poster for the second Down Under, the poster for The Rescuers popped up, and like the mice, they're nowhere near as fluffy as they are in the Rescuers Down Under. Like these character designs are a lot more detailed and a lot more like rounded, and as I said,
less scruffy, because you have those like thick black lines. Those are gone. If you look down even to the very intricate details, like the rouge on Bianca's cheeks, it's really well done.
And Bianca is just much fluffier. You know, they can't do that kind of fluff back in the 70s.
No, that's $1 million fluff right there.
Yeah, it took 13 years of development. That's the reason they made the Rescuers Down Under again. That's the reason it's the first sequel. Someone walked into Jeffrey Katzenberg's office, swept everything off his table, looked him in the eyes like, we can do the fluff. It's like, you must do the fluff.
We paid for the fluff, you have to use it.
It's like the Disney aging technology that's in all of their films, where like every character is for some reason de-aged for no reason whatsoever, because they probably paid a lot of money to invent that technology, and they were like, put it in all of our films.
I see there's no de-aging scene in this movie. Please write one.
Yes, we paid too much for this not to use it.
But to your point, consistency is the word that comes to mind for me. Like the colors, the movements, the lines, everything just like works in harmony. So like it is a big step forward in that sense. It's a very fluid and very pretty looking film. Whereas like before you could see the cracks or the creases or, you know, the joins, I suppose. See how the sausage is made, and it takes you out of the film. So this is a really big,
do you not kind of like that though?
I think
there's a humanity to it.
I do if it's an aesthetic choice, but I'm used to a higher class these days, so maybe I bump with it a bit more.
Eventually machines will just make these animated films by algorithm, and we won't even need the human touch. It's like, oh, the humans, they ruined it with their ideas and dialogue, whereas the machines will just concoct the best piece of entertainment imaginable. Do you think we'll reach that world?
I don't know. Maybe.
That an algorithm will just throw together like a film and just be like, there you go. Like, well, because procedural generation is a thing people are messing with all the time. So can you imagine like a procedurally generated film where it's just like whatever amount of scenes and it's put together in different combinations every time in a way that makes sense, and it's delivered so you can just have like endless entertainment. You'll never run out of movies.
That's kind of scary. I don't want to think about that.
Yeah, it's weird to think of like a culture and artistry without the people and artists.
Yeah.
Which you might get there, and like that's the dream world for freaking corporations who can produce their mass-marketed, soulless, personality-less drivel and feed it to people
without having to pay people.
Yeah,
that's kind of sad. The thought of a possible death of art, in a sense.
Yeah, but it'll never happen. Well, maybe it will. I think like corporations will probably try and make it happen, but I think it'll be like people still trying to use their vinyls, but in a much more extreme circumstance of I'd rather see people make things that are interesting than what if computers can make things that are interesting? Then what you do?
But to me, I'd rather see something that's interesting but flawed. But you can see the endeavor. Sometimes.
Well, there you go. I've worked you back around to liking to see the cracks. I won in the end. Sometimes
you like to see the endeavor, and even if it's not successful, you just appreciate that they've again reached for something.
People get so mad about things that are bad. I like things that are bad can be so interesting because like they can be bad for all the right reasons. They can be bad because it was an idea before its time. They can be bad because it was an idea that was more ambitious than could be executed. Like it could be bad because something about it, that something about the ideas just weren't quite there. But there's kernels of things in there. The execution wasn't done right, or like people get really mad when things are bad, and I'm like, bad things are interesting. Yeah, bad things put good things in context.
And sometimes they lead to good things.
Yeah, stand on the shoulders of giants, even if they're broken shoulders.
But you get a little higher, Gar, each time.
Yeah.
I can't do the rest of that because I'll get sued. But the story of this film is not based on any aspect of the original novels by Marjorie Sharp, other than the characters and the premise.
So she never sent them to Australia?
No.
Oh.
To capitalise on the rise of the popularity of the action-adventure genre, the film was set in Australia. The marketing for the film pitched it as Disney's first action-adventure film. And again, I didn't get that. Like action-adventure to me says thrilling and high-paced and, breathtaking, whereas this had some set pieces, but for the most part, it was very similar to the first one in that it was quite subdued in parts as well.
Also, it's not their first action-adventure film. What are we calling frickin' The Great Mouse Detective here? What is that film?
That's a detective.
It's an action-adventure film. What's The First Rescuers? It's an action-adventure film.
That's marketing for you, Car.
Yeah, get out of here with their first action-adventure film. They made plenty of them.
So they went all in on the action-adventure vibe. And
they did go for more like big set pieces, so didn't they? There's like a lot of action scenes in this, which they're fine.
For that reason, they got rid of the songs as well, because they thought the music would slow down the pace of the film.
Even though that's the thing they realised people like. They had Little Mermaid. Why didn't they like, hey, chuck a song in there? What's Nicole gonna do?
Yeah, we'll get to that later. But yeah, this feels like a weird aside because the Disney Renaissance has begun, but this is just there.
Yeah.
At the start of it.
As I said, this is very much every animated sequel you ever see. Like it's Shrek 2. It's all of them. It's all of the animated sequels that just don't really have a reason to exist, and then by the end of it, don't really justify their existence.
Yeah, Gar, we said we'd come back to this. To your point, Americans were also becoming more environmentally conscious at the time, so the decision was made to add an environmental message. The first film to do so since Bambi.
What was the environmental message in this film? Protect birds?
Don't poach animals, Gar.
I guess.
And the poacher got his comeuppance.
I didn't really get that as like a message of the film. Did they really need to say that?
I guess it wasn't that successful then.
Yeah, Bambi is a much better film with an environmental message.
Yeah, we don't see the villain in that case.
Yeah, but again, Bambi is a more artful film.
Story supervisor Joe Ranft. It's R-A-N-F-T. That's a hard one to say. Ranft had many creative disagreements with the studio management and marketing executives, including one disagreement where he optioned for casting an Aboriginal Australian child actor for the voice of Cody.
Oh, God forbid.
Which was overridden with the decision to cast a little blonde white kid in the words
for God's sake.
Of Ranft.
It's like, we can make this film authentic, or we can make it as inauthentic as possible. It's like, we'll take as inauthentic as possible, please.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to earlier when I said movie by numbers and committee.
And you see, the marketing department made this movie. Nobody else did.
Cara, as we said, there's dodgy American and British accents off the bat. There's no real Australians.
There's one.
Also, McLeach is from the southern United States for some reason.
Very strange. Like, why did they choose to do that? Why did they, like, who plays McLeach?
It's an American actor.
Yeah, but is it someone famous?
Yes. I can't remember. Oh, God, it's on the top.
George C. Scott.
Yeah.
Never heard of him.
You never heard of George C. Scott?
Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah.
Apparently in A Christmas Carol. No, I haven't.
Yeah, very famous American actor at the time.
Alright, at least they cast someone who's famous. But even then, what are you doing? Again, can we make this thing something that's just meant to have personalityless mass appeal? Or can we make it specific and interesting and authentic? And again, they go for personalityless mass appeal.
Yeah, again, it's set in Australia, but this guy, if he wasn't wearing the Crocodile Dundee hat, you wouldn't think he was Australian at all.
The funny thing is, the first Rescuers was set in like southern bayous. He would have been a much more fitting villain for that film.
And the one in that film could have fit more in this because she had a British accent. So there we go.
They're just making this make perfect sense.
Saying that, I did like aspects of the performance for McLeach. The physical comedy sequence where Joanna is trying to steal his eggs was very well done. And I also like the fact that he plays Cody like a fiddle and then tries to kill him out of spite.
He does want to murder Cody just because he won.
He's already won at this point, and as we know, Gar, that's the downfall of all good villains, classically plunging to his death in the end.
I like Bob Newhart's performance a lot. He's the highlight of the film for me.
Yeah.
I like Bernard's like neuroticness.
It's very subtle as well. You don't see, like, because there's a range of emotions that Bernard goes through. Like he's naturally reserved, he's naturally cautious, but he's brave when the moment calls for it. But you don't see this big kind of cartoonish shift where he hulks up, for want of a better term. Yeah, he just kind of does it despite his reservations, and he kind of jumps in there and he saves the day.
Even the scene where he like stands up to a warthog. Like the way is like, whatever, it's a pig. It's a wild pig.
Yeah.
And he's like, wild pig, you will be my steed. Ride me in this direction. And he's very stern. He's even stern in a way that's like just contained enough that it feels like Bernard. He's a very good character. It's a very good performance.
Yes, Bob Newhart, who we talked about, is very famous for being in The Big Bang Theory these days.
The Librarians.
Of course, Gar. The ending, like, wrapping up in the story here, the ending is kind of sudden. There's no real epilogue. You would have thought that they kind of would have done a wrap up where Cody goes back home to his mother because he is assumed dead at this point.
Yes, for quite some time. So a number of days.
She's sitting at home with his backpack crying away to herself while he's having a great lark.
Yeah, and apparently the rescuers just never leave Australia. They're stuck there forever.
You would have think they got back and, had their plaudits, and they might have had a wedding scene because Bernard
popped the question.
He popped the question adorably, in fact, of course.
It's very good. I like the relationship between Bernard and what's her name.
The only thing is I thought that the proposal was fun and cute, but it wasn't earned as such because
Why?
We know that they have a great partnership, but they didn't really show the romance as much, or at least tease it.
You wanted them to be lovey-dovey making eyes at each other?
Maybe a little bit. At least some indication where it's like it feels like the natural thing to happen, but I don't feel like they did the work.
But Bernard was going to propose at the start of the film, Ken, and it got derailed.
In a very comical fashion. Where classically he drops the ring and it does that thing where it gets kicked all around the place and ends up on a rat's toe.
Which is not very hygienic.
And then he tries to get it off, and then the old man gets decked. So there are some fun sequences in this film, Gar, but again, it is very derivative of the original. Going quickly to the music, Gar, this is one of only 2 Disney films that feature no songs at all. The first being The Black Cauldron, which we covered a few weeks ago in episode 25.
And should be celebrated.
Yes, it should be celebrated for its mediocrity. The score is a very 90s kids film score. It's enjoyable and uplifting at times, but standard for the time with no real surprises.
Didn't notice it. Again, and so that's one of those things where it's like, oh, it's at least not obnoxious. And I'm sure, as I said before in this podcast, there's probably some people who would score movies who would say you should never actually notice the score of the movie, and it should just work seamlessly with the scene and the dialogue in the moment. But
I would disagree with that, because we're in an era where these soundtracks are released, and if it's good enough, I'll want to listen to it separate from the film, and that was not one of these scores.
No, it's a perfectly acceptable middle of the road score.
Nicole will give us some more info on that at the end of the show. Gar, in terms of the legacy of this film,
there is none.
Well, Gar, there's a few bits here. First of all,
it's not in Kingdom Hearts.
Yes.
Which I forgot to mention last week, of course.
Gar, you have to do a recap of the last few weeks because you haven't mentioned this in a while.
Well, The Little Mermaid's a big one because The Little Mermaid is in 2 Kingdom Hearts games as a major world. It's in the first world where you do like the story of Kingdom Hearts, and the second one where it becomes a rhythm game. And in Memory of Melody, released this weekend, there's a bunch of Little Mermaid songs in it, which you've heard me playing. So yeah, Little Mermaid, huge role in Kingdom Hearts. Rescuers Down Under, absolutely none. So there you go. There's your Kingdom Hearts update. Well,
Gar, first of all, this is still the first of what is relatively few theatrically released animated feature sequels.
There's only 3 others?
Most sequels are direct-to-video. Like, I can think of Frozen 2, Wreck-It Ralph 2.
Fantasia.
Yeah.
Which is... It counts.
A spiritual
but does
sequel.
it? Yeah, but it counts. That's about it, I think.
That's about it. As far as I know, there's lots and lots of straight-to-DVD sequels. Some are better than others. We might get onto that in future episodes.
Oh yeah, we're running, like, by the time we finish, we're halfway through the Disney animated canon. I figure natural next move is Pixar.
Yes.
Which will be relatively short. There's, 20 Pixar films?
Something like that.
Then, of course, we'll be moving to the very important categories of straight-to-DVD movies and toon movies, because we will eventually cover a very goofy movie.
Yes, we need to get to the goofy movies because they are gold.
Yes, and Doug, we have to cover Doug. And then the next extension after that, naturally, is Disney Channel movies, to which we have reached the bottom of the barrel, and we'll have nothing left.
Yes, and we'll have to wait for new ones to come out.
Then we'll move on to Star Wars, or...
Ugh, no. The production techniques used in this film are a landmark achievement in cinema, let alone animation. And for me, the underwhelming performance of the film compared to The Little Mermaid just a year before is evidence, albeit anecdotal, that the musical format is a key component in the success of the Disney Renaissance and Disney animated features in general.
I'm trying to think of recent Disney animated features that did not have a heavy focus on songs that are also very good. Wreck-It Ralph is one. Big Hero 6 is another. Did not have songs, or at least a lot of them. I think it had one original song for it. So it's not a hard and fast rule that they can't deliver without songs. But generally the songs help.
I can understand why The Rescuers Down Under is important. This film looks spectacular, as we said, and is an outstanding achievement in film, but that's where the appeal ends for me. When Disney show clips of this film, they often show the flying scenes with the eagle. That's more or less all
Eagle! There's a Scrubs reference for you.
That's more or less all you need to see here from this film.
I think it's a sequel. It's an unimaginative sequel.
Yeah.
We've seen hundreds of them through the years. It's just like, we'll do another one. Why? Who knows?
Having seen it, I'm still not sure why this was Disney's first attempt at a multi-sequel franchise.
Again, I've explained it twice.
The story is fine, but it doesn't really make a strong case for revisiting these characters, as we've said.
They get engaged. It's very important character development.
Do you think they get married in the next one?
Sure.
Or they're like trying to get married and then get pulled away on an adventure and then they get married at the end.
Yeah.
In less than ideal but perfect circumstances.
Shotgun wedding in Vegas.
I really miss the songs here again in this one, Gar. Give me a musical over this any day of the week.
Would you like me to write an original Rescuer song?
Yes, Rescuers Down Under song in an Australian accent, please.
G'day, mate. We're in Australia. We're going to save this kid. He's American. We don't really understand, but we're rats. We travel across the world. Is there no rats in Australia? We know there's rats in Australia because we see them, but for some reason they're not qualified to save this kid. Oh, it's the Rescuers Down Under. I'm
just going into Lands Down Under now, Gar.
Eventually, yes.
And your Australian accent.
I did not want to offend people by sticking with that quote unquote Australian accent.
Overall, for me, if the goal was action adventure, I think they fell a bit short here. There was no real sense of pace or momentum.
The last one was a better action adventure film, even though it wasn't like described as an action adventure film. The first Rescuers is a better action adventure film.
There are some thrilling set pieces, but they are few and far between. Overall, The Rescuers Down Under is a middle-of-the-road sequel, and will pass the time but not have you begging for another one like they planned.
It's a perfect 5.5 out of 10 movie. It's completely inoffensive.
It'll pass the time.
Bernard is... I like Bernard.
We like Bernard. We spin off with just Bernard because they get divorced or she dies.
Well, she is dead.
Yeah. But what about Bernard trying to come to terms with his wife's death and then has to go save another kid?
Oh, we can get real deep with the Rescuers. You can mine that emotional territory.
We just wrote it for you, Disney. Where's our check?
I want to make a Rescuers.
Alright, Bernards and Biancas, sadly we've nearly come to the end of the show for another week. As we noted earlier, The Rescuers Down Under contains no original songs, but fear not, our resident musical expert Nicole will be delivering this week. You can find new episodes of Magic by Design every Monday, where all magical podcasts are downloaded. Check out our website at magicbydesign.buzzsprout.com to find a full list of podcast providers. There, you'll also find all our previous episodes if you're catching up or feel like revisiting an old favourite. Magic by Design is also on all your favourite social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/magicbydesignpod, on Twitter at magicdesignpod, and on the Insta at magicbydesignpod. If you've enjoyed what you've heard and want to support the show, please do consider giving us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Share the podcast on your socials, or even recommend the show to a fellow Disney fan. If you don't give us a 5-star review, we will send you on an all-expenses-paid trip to Australia. We mean it.
Do we?
Yeah.
Ken's paying for it.
Yeah, but like going to Australia is bad.
Ken's just getting his full anti-Australia bias out at the end.
Like, as we've learned here from this movie, Australia has nothing to offer, Gar.
Ken waited until the very end of the podcast when he knows the average listener is gone. He's like, oh, no one's going to sit through 45 minutes of this dope coming up with his own Rescuers song and doing bad accents. So he just gets it out there. He hates Australia. He just throws it out in the world. Poor Australians. Poor Liam.
I love Australians. I just don't like Australia.
Why? You've never been there. How can you not like it?
I don't want to be there.
Why?
Because I work in customer service and some of the most awful people I've dealt with have been Australians. No offense.
Didn't you just say I love Australians but don't like Australia? Now you've circled back to I hate Australians.
No, I don't hate all Australians. I just hate Australians. Some Australians are nice.
Do you ever deal with good people in customer service?
No.
So there you go. Biased sample.
I've seen the worst of Australia, Gar. We will be back next week at the same time, same place with Disney's 30th animated feature. It's a tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme. It's Beauty and the Beast. But until then, stay safe and remember, if you're a villain and your evil plan has succeeded, don't give in to the temptation to stop and gloat, as it will inevitably lead to your plunging to your doom.
Because he had like a rifle with a scope and he still couldn't shoot the rope. So learn how to shoot as well. Then the whole thing will still go to plan. You'll kill that child, just like you intended.
Kill that child for no reason.
You already won. Just to put the cherry on top. Murder.
Now then, Nicole is revisiting one of her previous hits this week with Someone's Waiting for You, originally featured in The Rescuers, but also starring in a reissue of the soundtrack for The Rescuers Down Under, so it totally counts.
Technicality! Woo!
As if you weren't spoilt enough already, Nicole has also declassified some top secret fun facts about the music of the film for your ears only. Thanks for listening, and take it away, Nicole.
Hello, Disney fans. It is I, your musical correspondent Nicole, coming to you live from my bedroom. This week, we're travelling to Oz. No, not the wizard, the other Oz, with the Rescuers Down Under. The score for this movie was written by Academy and Emmy Award-winning composer Bruce Broughton. This was his first soiree with Disney, but not his last. He composed music for Homeward Bound, The Incredible Journey, Baby's Day Out, and as Christmas is coming up, who can forget the classic that is Miracle on 34th Street, to name a few. He also wrote music for the CBS show Dallas. The Rescuers Down Under features no songs, the second animated movie not to have any songs, the first being The Black Cauldron. There were 3 releases of this soundtrack. One in 1990 along with the film release, and another in 2002 with 3 bonus songs added from the Rescuers. There was also a 3rd issue released in 2016 which included score parts and cues that were not included in the final cut. So, with that in mind, I'm revisiting Someone's Waiting for You, as it was released as a bonus track in 2002. I hope you enjoy it. Be brave, little one. Make a wish for each sad little tear. Hold your head up, though no one is near. Someone's waiting for you. Don't cry, little one. There'll be a smile where a frown used to be. You'll be part of the love that you see. Someone's waiting for you. Always keep a little prayer in your pocket, and you're sure to see the joy and happiness, and your little world will be bright. Have faith, little one, till your hopes and your wishes come true. You must try to be brave, little one. Someone